bringing the people behind our food to life.
Today we're going to make a Halloween cake, a spooky cake for the Halloween season. Our finished product today is going to be a 7-layer cake. We're going to be doing a tree and a kind of a graveyard scene. First thing I'm going to do, this is my buttercream. We're going to fill the cake. I'm just going to whip it up just a little bit to make sure no air bubbles are in there. And then just distribute about a cup to cup and a half of frosting. This is vanilla buttercream. You can do any kind of flavor, chocolate, cream cheese. Depends on your taste. It's all good. I'm spreading it around. I'm trying not to get too many crumbs in the frosting here, but it's not going to be seen, so it's not a big deal if you do. Since we're covering it in fondant, it doesn't have to be a real exact frost. It's okay if little pieces show through. It's all going to get covered up anyway, so spend your time on the decoration. We're going to do a quick crumb coat. A crumb coat just seals in all the crumbs, fills in all the kind of nooks and crannies here. So when you go to frost the cake, it's all ready to go. You don't get any crumbs in the finished product. But like I said, we're covering it in fondant, so if you do happen to get some crumbs, it's not a big deal. Just loading up my offset spatula, doing a quick frost, filling in all those holes as I go along. So you're going to see the cake through. That's good. Just enough to kind of smooth everything out. Makes it a lot easier when you go to actually frost it, that you start out with a clean, smooth product. Now that I've done a crumb coat on the cake, I'm going to actually frost the cake. So it's the same motions. You're going to put a little bit on top, take your offset, smooth it around. I have my cake on a turntable. If you're going to be doing a lot of cakes, it's really important to get a nice sturdy one. You want one that turns really smoothly. But if you're just going to be doing a couple cakes, they make inexpensive ones that are plastic that work just fine. But we do a lot of them, so we want something that turns really smoothly and is heavy duty. So I'm going to put the frosting on the side, putting a little thicker than what I did with the crumb coat. I smooth out a little bit as I go, but I wait to do the really smooth part until the very end once I get the cake completely covered in buttercream. Okay, so now that the cake is completely covered in buttercream, I'm going to switch to, it's called a bench scraper. It's just a flat blade with a handle. This enables me to get a really good smooth finish on the cake. And I turn the turntable and hold my bench scraper stationary. It's about at a 45-degree angle against the cake. You want to hold it straight up and down. If you tilt it one way or the other, your cake's going to be tilted one way or the other. So once you get a smooth finish on the side, then you have to go back and smooth off the top. So that's just bringing the edges in from the outer side to the in, working your way around the cake. If I was doing this, finishing this cake in buttercream, I would get this cake a lot smoother than what it is right now. We're going to do a fondant covering on the outside, so any little air bubbles, anything like that, they're not going to show. So at this point, the cake needs to chill. It needs to chill anywhere from 30 minutes to about an hour. It really depends on how warm the cake is, how cool your refrigerator is, but you want it really cold, not frozen, just cold, where the buttercream is set up. So when we go to put the fondant on, you don't get a lot of lumps. Everything stays nice and even. So I'm just transferring to a sheet, and we're going to put this into the walk-in to chill. So now that the cake is chilled, we can go ahead and cover in fondant. Obviously this cake is a little taller than the one I filled. This is actually 7 layers of cake. For the design that I'm doing, I need a little bit more room on the vertical side. First thing we're going to do is get out our gray fondant. Whenever you mix fondant up and let it sit for a little bit, you have to re-knead it together. We're going to put a little cornstarch down on the table so it doesn't stick. And then we're just going to give this a quick knead. Get your arm muscles working. Just folding the fondant over, working it forward, and then rotating. Just needs to be softened up so we can roll it out. Okay, so we're gonna use a little bit more cornstarch. We're gonna need quite a big, roll this out to quite a big circle. So you wanna cornstarch your whole table, make sure you have enough room to work. Rolling pins come in all different shapes and sizes. I prefer this big metal one. I can put a lot of pressure on it. It's the right size. Occasionally just pick up your piece of fondant as you're working with it. Put a little bit more cornstarch underneath. You don't want to use too much cornstarch on the top because you'll have to brush that all off. So you'll need a little bit, but don't go overboard. The fondant you can get from a variety of different places. I know if you have a local cake decorating store, also some of the major arts and crafts stores carry fondant now. They have usually a little cake decorating section. My food colorings, I generally order them from a wholesale provider, but you can get them normally in a cake decorating supply store. You want to use a gel-based food coloring. The liquids do not work for fondant. You'll just get a sticky mess. Also, the color is much more intense when you get the gel or the paste. So I'm just rotating this around. We're aiming for a rough circle, but it doesn't have to be exact. The main thing is you want to get it to about 1/4 of an inch thick. Fondant is just sugar, so you don't need a big thick layer on your cake. You've already frosted it. It's generally just kind of a decorating medium, so most people don't want a thick piece of fondant on their cake. Okay, we're getting close. Just keep rotating around. You'll feel like over here is getting nice and thin, but over here is pretty thick still. So want to even it all out. I normally just kind of eyeball how big to make the fondant circle. It's always best to overdo it rather than underdo it. We're going to be cutting off the excess, so it's okay to have a little bit more. It makes it really difficult if you don't have quite enough to get a nice clean covering. That looks like about enough fondant. It's a good thickness. It's not too thick, not too thin. If you make it a little too thin, it will rip, so you have to be careful. And I just usually take my hands and kind of smooth out the top. It gets off some of the cornstarch. Making sure it's not stuck to the table. It will move freely. So now when I put my hands underneath, I spread out my fingers, get it as wide as possible, and then you lift and drape it over the cake. You want to move quickly because you don't want to tear it. The first thing I do is smooth off the top and kind of make sure the edges on the cake, the fondant's attached to them. So after I make sure the fondant is stuck to the top of the cake and there's no air bubbles, I work my way around the cake, going down the sides. You pull out the fondant and smooth down. Then rotate the cake, pull out the fondant, smooth down. You do have to be careful, and it's tearing a little bit back here, that it will start to tear here if you put on too much pressure. Especially since this cake is so tall, we're gonna have to be really careful. But we can always patch it up a little bit. Smooth down, pull out. At this point, if you don't like how it's going, you can always take it off, re-roll it, and then try again. You would just need to make sure to chill your cake a little bit longer. It also depends on the fondant you get. There's a bunch of different brands. Some are better than others. But you want to play with it a little bit first. Maybe try out a couple different types before you settle on one. You want it to be pliable, but not too soft. And you also don't want it, you want it to taste good. It should have just a marshmallow flavor, so if it's really chemically tasting or anything like that, find a different one. You can make your own fondant. I don't normally. It's hard to keep the end product consistent, and I find the commercial brands just work a little bit better. Plus, it's quicker. Once you get the cake completely covered in the fondant, we're going to trim off the excess. I take the corner of my hand here and just kind of wring the cake. So I take my hand and just press it into the board just a little bit, all the way around the cake. It just marks where I need to cut. I'm going to take my paring knife and cut a little bit away from the cake. Don't cut too close, because you want to leave a little bit of excess there. Otherwise, you'll see the cake when we take off the fondant. Okay. Then this will just lift off and over. I normally do a quick knead just to make sure the fondant doesn't dry out. You always want to make sure to cover your fondant when you're not using it in plastic wrap. Keep it in an airtight container. Once the fondant starts to dry out, it will get all crackly. It makes it really hard to work with. You can add a little shortening to it to bring it back a little bit, but it will never be the same. So, best thing to do, keep it wrapped up and covered. The next step is to finish off the edges here, because when I trimmed off the fondant, I didn't go right up next to the cake. Now that the bulk of the fondant is away, I can see a more exact way where the edge is going to be. So I want to make sure my blade is horizontal, not vertical. We're just trimming up that little bit of excess to clean up the cake. Generally, I'll just toss these little scraps because I'll have pieces of buttercream and cake on them. I don't like to work that back into the big piece of fondant. Okay, now that we have our cake covered, we can start decorating. The next step, after I've covered a cake in fondant or frosted in buttercream, I decide what is going to be my front and what is going to be my back. The front is the side where you think it looks the most perfect. The back is if you have any little, well, things like that. If it's not quite perfect, put it toward the back. If it looks great, then have that toward the front. So we're going to be working right here. Now that I have it covered, I'm going to mix a couple colors. We can stick our cake off to the side. It can just sit out now. Now that we're not worried about keeping the buttercream cold, it will be nice and just fine right there. I already have some colors already mixed up, but we need to make a yellow. This is where you're going to need some disposable gloves. Food coloring will definitely stay in your hands, so just to keep things a little nicer. So this is a gel color. It's really intense. It's a commercial grade food coloring, but you can find it at any cake decorating supply store. And they come in all different colors. I don't generally get a lot of them. I just get the basic ones and mix my own colors. We're going to need a little cornstarch down. We're going to color this whole piece yellow, but I take off a little bit and color that in intense and then mix it into here. It helps me control the color a little bit easier. Yellow is one of those colors that can get neon really fast. So by doing this way, I can control what my end color is going to be like. I just smush it around in my hand. You can do it on the table, but this keeps your area a little bit cleaner. So you can see that's really bright yellow, and we don't want quite that bright. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little pea-sized piece and mix it into the white. And again, I smush it around in my hands first, and then I'll knead it on the table. We're going for kind of a harvesty gold color, which means we're going to mix a little bit of the orange in as well. we need to have a little bit more yellow. Usually before I start a cake, I get all of my colors mixed up, have everything ready to go. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take a little bit of the orange I've already made up and add it into the yellow. So a little dollop. We just want to take that kind of lemon yellow and make it more of a gold. You can buy a gold food coloring, but like I said, I generally mix my own colors. I can control it a little bit better. You want to mix it until it's not streaky anymore. So you want the color uniform. You can see there's still little streaks of orange, so you need to knead it a little bit longer. And that looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this back up with plastic wrap. So we have our colors mixed. We have our cake covered. Our next step is to start decorating. I'm going to start with a strip around the base. We're going to do that out of black. So this is going to be the ground, so we're going to make it kind of wavy, but it's going to be a border all the way around. Okay. We're going to make a long strip, so you need quite a bit of table space. We also need cornstarch all the way around. You can use powdered sugar if you don't have cornstarch. It's a little coarser texture. I prefer the cornstarch because it's finer. I don't recommend flour. That doesn't dissolve nearly as nicely. Cornstarch is the best, but in a pinch, you can use other things too. So I'm making a snake, just a long rope. It's easier to roll out a long strip of fondant if you already have kind of that shape to start with. So once you have the rope down, just flatten it just a little bit. This again makes it easier to roll it out. And also, we're gonna need a little bit more cornstarch. First thing I'm gonna do, I have a small rolling pin and then I have my larger one. This is what I use for most of the small decorating items. And then this is what I normally use for covering the larger cake. The first thing I'm gonna do is flatten out this a little bit more. And then I'll take the big rolling pin and go up this direction. So switching to the larger rolling pin, I'm going to continue flattening it out. This is a 9-inch cake here, so we're going to need about 30 inches long. Always err on the side of a little bit too much, again, rather than not enough. I'm switching to a bigger knife. I'm going to cut off just the excess to make a nice straight edge. Working all the way down. And I'm going to remove this extra fondant here. Black is one of those colors that cornstarch will show up on really easily. So I want to try not to get any cornstarch on the top. And if I do, I just generally rub it away. At the very end, I'll probably take a brush and just brush off any extra. Then I'm going to switch to my paring knife and just do kind of a general wave. Going up and down, it's just going to be the background, so there's no exact science here, it's just think hills. Nice sloping hills. Before we put this on, we need to brush the cake with a little water, otherwise it won't stick. So I have just a little bit of just tap water here and a pastry brush or a little paintbrush. And you're just lightly brushing it with water as you go around. You don't want it too wet or it will start to dissolve the fondant. So just a little bit. You can always go back if you didn't have enough and tack some down with a little bit more water. Just trimmed up the edge just a little bit, and then I'm going to lift this up and put it around the side. It is something that you kind of have to work a little fast with, otherwise it will rip. If it does, we can fix it, but it's easier if you just move a little faster, and then we'll go back by and smooth it out as we go. Okay. Once you get the bulk of it on, then it's easier to actually go back and flatten everything out, make sure all the fondant is tacked down. The tricky part is getting it on there. I'm gonna come back with my paintbrush and my water. Just add a little bit of water behind the fondant. I'm flattening it out with my hands. Work your way around the cake, make sure everything's tacked down. But again, don't use too much water. You don't want the fondant to dissolve. I'm just taking my hands and kind of rubbing off the cornstarch. Just a little bit. Making sure everything again is all secure. You always want to make sure, especially when you're going from black to another color, that you wipe down your area. There's bits of black on the table, and you don't want to get that mixed in because we're switching to yellow. You don't want to change the color of the yellow with the black food coloring. I'm going to switch back to our small rolling pin. We're going to need our water and our paintbrush, as well as our cornstarch. And I also have a set of cutters here. We're going to do quite a large moon, so we need a large round. You can freehand it. You don't have to use cutters. You could use just a knife or trace a circle, but cutters make your life a little bit easier. Since we just made this color, it's nice and soft. You don't need to rework it. As you're rolling out the fondant, just rotate the fondant piece around. We're going for a circle, but obviously we have enough here. So with your cutter, you don't need to dip it in cornstarch or anything like that. It should just release. Make sure to kind of wiggle it back and forth that you've cut all the way through. You can do a couple different things. You can either put water directly on your cake where you know you were going to put it, or you can put a little water on the back of your piece. I usually find it's easier to put the water on the piece when I'm applying it to the side, but it's kind of however it works easiest for you. It's a nice big moon. Kind of rub it on there, make sure everything is attached. Our next step is the tree. We're going to be working with modeling chocolate. Modeling chocolate is similar to fondant, but it has a different texture. It actually is chocolate, whereas fondant is just sugar. It's basically corn syrup and chocolate chips melted together, and then you'll let it set up, and then you can knead it and work it just like fondant. It is a little firmer. But I found the best way to get brown is to use chocolate. Brown food coloring doesn't normally come out very good. It's kind of orangey. So the chocolate brown of the chocolate is perfect. With the tree, I'm gonna freehand that. We're gonna roll the modeling chocolate out a little bit thicker than we did the fondant. Not too much, just a little bit. Because we're gonna have part of the tree maybe sticking up just a little bit from the top of the cake. So we want to make sure it has enough thickness to stand up. I'm going to switch to the paring knife. And if you don't like your tree, you can always wad it up and start over. You're not locked into anything here. Once you stick it on the cake, it's pretty much set, but beforehand, you can make as many adjustments as you want. And we'll probably adjust the size just a little bit once I get it cut out. And once we kind of lay it up here and see how it looks. But you want to be careful when you're peeling off the extra pieces here that you've cut all the way through. Okay, so we're going to adjust a little bit right now. I don't like that piece, how that's looking, so we're going to just change it up a little bit. Okay, let's take a look. Yeah. That's good. Put a little bit of water on the back. You could also use buttercream to glue this down since it is a little bit thicker and you want to make sure it sticks, but water should be fine. We're going to do a little detail work on the tree itself. I'm going to take one of the decorating tools. It's a gum paste tool. It just has kind of a point on one side and a little thicker point on the other. You don't want to use the very point. You want to kind of use the side here. Otherwise you'll rip the chocolate. So we're going to do just some wavy lines. Just adds a little texture. Let your creative juices flow. I looked up a bunch of Halloween pictures to get some ideas. I'm going to darken up a little bit of gray because we want the gravestones to stand out from the background. So what we're going to do is just take a little bit of the black, mix it into the gray. So if you want to leave it marbled, stop kneading while you still see streaks of the previous color. And roll it out. And as you roll it out, you'll see more of the marbled streaks. So you can kind of decide what you like best. And that's where we'll cut. Okay. So there's some nice marbling going on here, over here. I'm just gonna freehand. They're gonna be all different sizes and a few different shapes. And I'm gonna cut out a bunch of them and then put them on. That way I can decide the layout once I have them all cut. Fondant is sometimes a little hard to work with when you're cutting it out, especially cutting out smaller pieces, because it's so sticky. It moves a lot when you go to cut it with a knife, or sometimes it sticks to the knife itself. Usually what I'll do is I'll go back and try to trim up as much as possible. You could also get like a little box cutter. They have little blades. That works sometimes if you can find a small one, like in a craft store. Okay, so as far as placement goes, I do have a spot over here where my two pieces met that I definitely want to put something. So we're going to start over with the big one there. Just a little water on the back. And then that guy is going to go right there. I think we'll put one on this side just to kind of even it out. So now we're going to make some fondant bats. We're also going to make some clouds to go behind the bats, but I want to make the bats first, set them off to the side, and then do a few clouds. So I don't have a bat cutter. I have a large bat cutter, but I don't have a small bat cutter. And freehanding it would be a little bit much. So we're going to use a butterfly cutter, but we're going to adjust it slightly. Pop them out, and then we're going to cut off part of it, reshape it just a little bit. You could just freehand them. It's really hard to do small pieces. We're going to use just our little tool here and kind of shape the wings just a little bit and shape the body. So we're going to put those off to the side for a minute, because I think this cake needs a couple little clouds. We're going to switch back to the white, which we're going to, I think, just do a really light gray. I think the white's a little too stark, so I'm just needing a little bit of the darker gray into the white. Like I said, we want a really light gray. Yes, perfect. So we're going to cut out just some loose clouds, just kind of wispy. When I'm cutting, I gently hold the piece of fondant with my hand here. Otherwise, it will scoot along with the knife. So I'm just putting a little bit of pressure on what I'm cutting. That way I can cut a little bit more accurately. So a little bit of water. We're going to start with the piece that I want to cover up first. And then maybe one over here. Like the idea of one of the bats against the yellow moon. The next thing we're going to make are some pumpkins. So with our orange fondant, we're going to knead it together a little bit. If you're making a lot of these and you want them all about the same size, generally I'll make a little log and then cut off equal sized chunks. So I'm making a ball. Just roll it around in your hands. So it's almost like a blade, but it's not sharp, but it has a nice edge to it. You can use a knife, like the back end of a knife, That would work too. You don't want to cut through the fondant, you just want to indent. So I'm starting at the top, making an indent, and then rolling it around to the bottom. Start at the top, roll around, you're just rocking the blade back and forth. The next step, we just need to add a little bit of a stem. I'm going to use modeling chocolate for that. Pinch off just a tiny little bit, then make a snake. And what I generally do is just twist. Just a little bit. I'm just cutting off just a tad. Sometimes you need a little bit of water and sometimes it will stick on its own. This one needs just a little bit of water. If you're having trouble with it sticking to your fingers, just take your little tool here, kind of press it in. Modeling chocolate will kind of melt in your hands as you work with it, so if it gets too soft, put it off to the side and then go back to it. Let it cool down a little bit. We're going to use a little buttercream to glue them down. Water with 3D things like this, it will only hold so much, so buttercream or some sort of frosting would work best. I'm going to use a little bit of orange because they're orange, so it won't show if in case it kind of ekes it out around the side. So now we're going to add a little bit of detail to the gravestones and then we're pretty much done. So what I'm going to use, just a paintbrush. It needs to be kind of a fine tip because we're going to be painting on just a little bit there. And then just straight food coloring. If I'm doing a lot of painting, I'll squirt some of the food coloring onto a little tray. I'm just going to be doing a little bit, so the cap works just fine. So I'm getting a little bit on my brush. And then we're just going to paint RIP on here, some little squiggles, maybe some dates. Use your imagination. You do a little cross. If you find your food coloring is a little too thick, you can just dip your brush in a little water. You don't want to add too much water. Again, you'll start to dissolve your fondant a little bit or else it will start to run. I think we're done. So we have our bats and our moon, our spooky tree, our pumpkins, which you could, like I said, make into little jack-o'-lanterns if you wanted to, and then our headstones. It's our Halloween cake.
Then we get into all the fall activities with the pumpkins and the pumpkin patch. The corn maze is about 7 acres. As best we can calculate, about 2.5 miles of trails in it. All you can see is the corn in front of you and around you.